You might be wondering how on earth a war with birds could even happen. Well, let me take you back to the year 1932 in Western Australia. The Great Depression was in full swing, and many veterans from World War I were struggling to make a living. The government had a plan to help these veterans. They offered them land to farm in Western Australia. Now, this seemed like a great idea at first. The veterans were given land, equipment, and even ammunition to protect their crops from rabbits. But little did they know, they were about to face a much bigger problem. The emus. These emus, in search of food and water, started invading the farmlands. They would trample over crops, destroy fences, and cause havoc. The farmers, armed with their rifles, tried to scare them away, but the emus were relentless. They would scatter in all directions, making it nearly impossible to hit them. The farmers soon realized that they were no match for the emus. They needed help, and they needed it fast. So they reached out to the government requesting military assistance. And that's when things took a bizarre turn. The government, in response to the farmers' plea, sent in a small group of soldiers armed with machine guns. Yes, you heard that right. Machine guns against emus. It sounds like overkill, doesn't it? Well, it turns out, even with machine guns, it wasn't an easy task. The soldiers would set up their machine guns, aim at the emus, and start firing. But the emus, being agile and fast, would quickly scatter, making it difficult to hit them. The soldiers would manage to take down a few, but the majority of the emus would escape unharmed. This battle between man and bird went on for weeks. The soldiers would try different tactics, but the emus always seemed to outsmart them. It became a national joke. The mighty Australian army struggling to defeat a bunch of birds. Eventually, the government decided to withdraw the troops. The emus had won this war. The farmers were left to deal with the emu problem on their own. Some resorted to building higher fences, while others tried to find alternative ways to protect their crops. And so, the Great Emu War of 1932 came to an end. It may not have been a traditional war, but it certainly left a mark on Australian history. It's a reminder that sometimes, even the most unexpected, enemies can pose a challenge. So the next time you see an emu, remember the brave soldiers who once fought against them. In the year 1932, Australia found itself at war. Not with another country, not with an insurrection, but with emus. A war so strange, so utterly bizarre, it could only happen in Australia. This is the tale of the Great Emu War. It all started with the Great Depression. Farmers in Western Australia, many of them World War I veterans, were struggling to make ends meet. They were promised subsidies for their wheat, but when the government failed to deliver, the farmers were understandably upset. And then the emus arrived. Around 20,000 emus migrated into the Campion region, finding the cultivated lands a perfect feast. The emus began to run amok, eating and ruining the crops. The farmers were desperate. They had just fought a war, and now they were under attack again, this time from birds. So what did they do? They did what any self-respecting ex-soldier would do. They asked for military assistance. Can you imagine the conversation? Hello, Army. We've got a bit of an emu situation here. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery was put in command. Armed with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, the troops were ready for battle. The date was November 2nd, 1932. But the emus proved to be a formidable enemy. They could run fast, they could scatter, and they could take a bullet and keep on running. The first operation resulted in maybe a dozen emus out of 50. The second operation, a few days later, used a truck to chase the birds, but the ride was so bumpy that the gunner couldn't aim. By December, the troops were recalled. Meredith's official report claimed 986 kills with 10,000 rounds, meaning it took 10 bullets to kill one emu. The war was over, but the emus had won. The Great Emu War of 1932, a war where the enemy was not another nation, but a bird. A war that saw machine guns used against emus, and the emus won. A war that ended not with a surrender, but with the realization that it was easier to put up fences than to fight emus. And so, let's raise a toast to the emus, the undefeated champions of the most unconventional war in history. After all, it's not every day you can say you won a war against machine guns. You might even say the emus were the real fly in the ointment. Sorry, couldn't resist. Next time you see an emu, remember this story. Remember the Great Emu War, where birds outsmarted humans and their machines. A tale so absurd, so utterly Australian it could only be true. And remember, no matter how tough things get, At least you're not at war with emus. Well, hopefully.